everybody, and welcome back to another episode of SchmoeTalks. This is SchmoeTalks episode 10. My name is Aaron Knoll. Thank you guys for coming back for another week of Showdown talk. We are back, and we are continuing this week on a series that we have had going for a few weeks now, where we are doing a flashback series looking at the previous seasons of the Showdown. Now, originally in my head, I thought this will be simple. We'll do seasons 1 and 2 in episodes, season 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Make it real nice and simple. Then I realized just how many matches in a year the Showdown actually puts out, and it's a funny high number, even when you're cutting matches out of that elimination. So I've decided we're going to make this a little longer, since the people who are tuning in are generally seeming to enjoy this. We're going to spread it out, and that also gives us more room to kind of bring people on the show and get people inducted to the show before we go on to full-on interviewing people, which makes me really excited. So with that, today we are covering Season 4, the first half of Season 4, as the title says, focusing on kind of the initial reign of the Patriots, as well as heading into the first Collider Collision and everything in between. But I am not alone. I am joined by three exciting panelists who are here to talk. Up first, joining me, he was here for our last episode covering Season 3, and he is back once again to cover Season 4. He is Mr. JD Domash. JD, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going well. I'm very excited to talk about these set of matches. There are some really interesting ones looking over it.
Absolutely, man. Great to have you here. I'm going to drop you to the back for just 1 second while I introduce another member. He is a face that has been on TMG before. He's a regular guest appearer on one of our newer shows, the Supernova Show. He's played in TM Geek. I think he's played in teams for sure, maybe singles. He's been all around the community. He is Mr. Robert, as he says, full-grown carrots Kastner. How's it going, man? Great to have
Going
you.
well, yeah, full grown, because I don't want to take the mantle of baby carrots. That's already been established fully, and I just want to be different, you know? And yeah, all around the TMG landscapes, because I love this community.
Absolutely. We do try, man. Thank you for being here. Excited to have you for the first time. And I'll drop you to the back for just 1 second. And then our third guest coming on, another first-time appearer. He runs his own channel with a series of shows. He's going around the Showdown community, kind of integrating himself. He's appeared on our channel before, twice as a guest on our weekly show After Dark. He is Jordan Anderson. Jordan, how's it going, man? Welcome to the show.
It's going great, yeah. I'm excited for this. This is probably one of the most fun I've had preparing for a show in a long while, just going back through all the matches. I forgot how many just amazing matches were from Season 4, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. As I bring these guys back into the stream, we'll go ahead. And before we get into it, we're going to pause for just 1 second. So for those of you who had seen some of the previous episodes, I talked about between the first set of initial people I had booked to come on, the first 8 guests and myself entered into this competition, where for the whole first month of Showdown, we predicted who would win each of the matches in advance of them airing. And I set up a system, and as each match finalizes, they go through, they get points, they get a win-loss record in terms of prediction, and whoever wins at the end of this month will get the option of one of 3 prizes. They will either get to A, be a guest on SchmoeTalks, talking about whatever specific sect of the Showdown they like. B, they will get to host an episode of SchmoeTalks, and it'll just be whatever upcoming interviews or shows I have set up. They'll get to host one of them full on. Or the third option is to appear on one of our other shows, After Dark, which is our movie news kind of weekly joke around show, as a guest on that. So there's 3 prizes up for grabs. The winner gets their choice there. And so we wanted to update on that quickly, just so those people and you guys watching were curious to see as I bring it in here. We have it definitely more set up. So for the first week of matches full on, we had Amaru Moses take on Jesse Swift, and as you guys see highlighted, we had almost everyone went for Amaru. If you guys watched our interview with Jesse Swift last week, I, with confidence, changed my vote and put my vote behind Jesse, and it paid off about as well as everyone else seemingly expected. But when you guys move down 1, we have the opposite of that, Everyone voted for Sean with the exception of Michael Rhett Dingus, and as you guys will see, that helped him a lot in terms of the rankings. The next match was a very similar deal. Everyone voted for Marisol except myself. I confidently voted for Vinny. I stand by that vote. I still think he has potential to get some good wins and be a good player, but it was not meant to be. And then obviously the pay-per-view event from Friday night, Dan Merle and Jeff Snyder in the number one contenders match. As you see there, Ryan and Colton unfortunately got the bad prediction there, but everybody else got the points. Now, what does all this mean? Well, as I scroll down and you will see here, the standard I came up with for the competition is a correct prediction on a normal match, which is a Wednesday or Thursday match, gets you a point. A correct prediction on a Friday match or an undercard match gets you 2 points. And a correct prediction on one of the 4 main event matches each month, which are the Versus, the main event of Throwdown, and both Battlefield matches, gets you 3 points. So as we move into the chart now, as I said, Michael Dingus got the most out of being the only one to predict Marie Wilson. He is in the lead with a 5-1 record and 10 points. Tied for second, we have Andy Sweet and Eric Kachia, who are at 9 points with a 4-2 record. Right below them, tied for fourth, we have Ryan Payne, our guest here, JD Domash, and my channel co-runner, Matt Beer, with a 4-2 record at 8 points. Then we have our TM Geek Commissioner, Kevin Poss, at 5 points with a 3-3 record. I'm in 8th place with a 2-4 record and 5 points. And our Supernova Show host, Colton Roberts, comes in at last with a 2-4 record and 3 points. Now, just based on the way that the show records, as you guys know, these are pre-recorded. We won't have an update for you every single week, but you guys will be getting the updates as they come. And you guys, at the end, will have our winner announced. And I will be excited for that because I'm sure to the people watching who aren't involved, this means absolutely nothing. But if this goes well, I'd love to make this a recurring thing going forward, especially as we are seeming to be getting everything kind of announced in advance a lot of the time. So it'd be really fun to make this a recurring thing. But that's the update for now. That's it. We're done killing time. We got the intros out of the way. We got the house cleaning done. Let's go ahead and get into it. So Season 4 of the Schmoedown, and the reason I had to make this the first one we really split up, was the first season where it really expanded. It went from being, a bit of a podcast to a 1-show-a-week show to now we're getting 2 to 3 episodes a week. We're getting these big events after the spectacular happened at the end of season 3. We're getting double build episodes. There's some where they started the whole undercard, main card event type deal with matches. So let's go ahead and get into the first couple I pulled out. The openings of each seasons at this point in time usually started off pretty slow. They were kind of building. And so some of the more interesting matches I pulled out were the William Bibiani JTE match, which ended, surprisingly for fans at the time, in a TKO win for JTE, breaking the horrific streak he was having in singles. We also had 2 elimination matches in which the Wangers and the Real Rejects played for breakup. The Real Rejects won, and that saw the Wangers as a team breakup. And then we had Finstock take on Makuga, or more likely Finn Draco there take on Makuga with that very complimentary screenshot. Take each other on, with the loser being banned for a year, at which point Makuga, in the arms of his friends, beat Finstock, banning him from the league for a year. Not that would ever actually stand, because just another nickname would be around the corner. So out of this first set of matches, I'll go ahead and start with Jordan on my left hand or right hand side here. What stands out to you about these first couple of matches? Which one stands out to you the most?
Well, for me, I got to go with the Finn Draco match. Like, that match is probably one of my favorite matches of all time, honestly. Like, it was a crazy match because there's a lot of weird things that went down in this match. I mean, obviously, you have Mark and Draco up. There's the first weird thing right there, and so he comes out and he's Finstock in quotes, and so they were gonna give Josh Makuga a rematch because it was essentially that if he loses, then he has to leave the Showdown for a year. So it's kind of, they gave him his choice, and he said, "No way! Like, I'm gonna take him on. I'm not afraid of this guy." So he went up against him, and surprisingly, you won. Like he shocked everybody. He didn't really have a very good first round. The first round was a little shaky for him, but he eventually was able to pull through. And then you have Tom Dagnino. Tried to pull the whole thing where it's like, well, Finstock was the one that was banned for a year, not Tom Dagnino. So it's this whole thing like, can we still see Tom Dagnino? And I think we did a little bit. So yeah, that match was one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I'll move on down to Robert then. Which one of these kind of stands out to you the most?
That one I would say is kind of the best played match of the three. It's interesting that it seemed like Andreyko had that one for the majority of the match. Makuga got action adventure, I believe, and then made it real close. And then it looked like Makuga would fall apart in the third. And then he got Kiss of the Spider Woman pulled out of the recesses of God knows where. And Andreyko got Bond, which is probably not his bag. Interesting, I think the least interesting match for the match sake was Rejects and Wangers, even though technically it was the closer match of all of them, because I think it came down to the wire at one point.
21 to 20.
The interesting thing about that one is that because they got banned, we started to see behind the scenes, even though we had the Lion's Den, we started to now see competing factions, because that's when Copster and RB3 start the Young Bucks. And then eventually we get to the point where they bring in Hector Navarro and they try to bring in other people. So that one I actually think had the longer lasting notice of like how this would affect the league, because we started to get factioning as more of a thing than just something Dagnino started because he couldn't compete. We all knew that. So he just wanted to be associated with champions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
And then JD.
I do think that's interesting that it from what you were saying from a macro perspective, but even from a micro perspective, they're still like one of the longest running team. Basically, they're one of the few teams that are still basically better after all these years. Yes, they broke. There was a breakup in between, but yeah, it's still interesting that they're still around and still a team after all this time. And the one I find interesting is I mentioned this last time, Bibbs and JTE, because this began the trend of like Bibiani, if you could get him to the third round, and you could get him into trouble. Like he was this wishy-washy character for a few years until they brought the free-for-all into play, and then that's when he really kind of just exploded. But like especially after that Andreyko and Bibbs match in season 3, everybody thought he was going to be the next champ. I remember that. Still remember in season 4, everybody's like, he's the next champ. He's the next champ. He's going to defeat Dan and like be this long running champ, and that just didn't happen. It's really weird thinking about that match in hindsight. That one's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. That match was pardon the pun, but a bit of a beast killer in terms of people. He had one match in season 3. He blew everyone away, and then coming into this season, I believe if I remember correctly, he was the second match overall. There was one match before this. So everybody was like, oh, he's gonna win. JT had been on with the exception of playing with Jeff, he'd been on such a shit streak. I mean, we talked about it with season 3. He got beat by a swimmer. Like there was no lower point you could go. So of course, putting him up against a 1-0 Lightning rookie here, I mean, this was the death in the nail in the coffin, and it wasn't. He beat him, and he went on a pretty solid run, as we'll get to not here, but in part 2 in that tournament. He went on a pretty solid run later in the year. So it is interesting to see this was kind of a turning point for the both of them. And yeah, you're right. It is kind of interesting to think, because everyone talked about with last season how like, oh, they got their second win with the Real Rejects. Well, this was their first win, was to stay together. They then went on to keep losing until they finally got another win. But I think no matter what their record, they should just be allowed to stay together, because I mean, at least they try. Like you can never say there's a match they've played where they're not trying. They're just not getting the wins.
Yeah.
I think that was cemented in the free-for-all, right, Aaron? Because when John Humphrey came in, because they were just kind of like a cutesy team, really. They staved off elimination, and they were cutesy, and then John comes in at the top, and he goes, what, 12, 15 rounds. I forget what it is before we get the big killer table where Andreyko gets rid of McWeeny and Merle and Roca and I forget who else, but Bibiani, I think. But they were just cutesy, and then they kind of galvanized, I think, by that. And even though they don't win as much, at least they did win. They won a live event, I believe, right? I think they won one of those, and they're someone who it's just an enjoyable team. But when they put their minds to it, they're good.
Yeah, and also the other thing I want to say before we move on, I want to briefly touch on the Josh Makuga and Tom Dagnito or Finstock match, because that one just reminds me of how dangerous of a player Josh Makuga can be when he actually cares or actually just puts a little bit of effort. Like if I think towards the end he had his career going, he had another career, he had other interests that he wanted to do, and that's why we got the retirement match that we got this season. But this match, he can beat again, it's weird. Like when he actually puts his mind to it, like he can beat anyone. It's that's why it's like there's two parts of me that loves what the character that Josh Makuga became in the Showdown, and at the same time absolutely hates it because he was somebody who actually, and again, you talked about it in season 1 how it was a bunch of drunk people just sitting around, and at the same time he went all the way to the finals in season 1. He was this close to the singles championship. It's really weird, his trajectory of where his career ultimately went and the kind of player he was at one point. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move on. And we get into, season 3, I believe they may have had 1 or 2 of them, but this was the first season where kind of title week or a string of title matches really became a thing, where the title matches all happened around a similar period. And so the first one that happened not long after the season began, and it was a pickup of the matches that happened at the Spectacular. So off the heels of the first Intergeekdom 5-way, we had Robert Meyer Burnett take on Hector Navarro, which was, again, the interesting point we talked about. Burnett won because of the format, but Hector actually handedly beat Burnett in that match in terms of points scored. They played each other. Then we had the number 1 contenders from Spectacular, Team Trek, take on the Patriots for the belt. And then we had the other number 1 contender from Spectacular, John Roca, take on Dan Murrell for the belt, in a match that would see the first person in the Schmoedown to ever beat Dan Murrell. And I think this image encapsulates everything about these two. John's having a spasm, and Dan's drinking his coffee.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and get into it, guys. I'll go ahead and go to Robert first on this one. Which of these 3 matches, when you go back, kind of stands out to you the most? Because they're all title matches, so they're all big in some way.
This is my favorite title week. Actually, even beyond just kind of the list that you gave, I think it's one of my favorite title weeks ever because all the matches are very, very good. All of them are very good. The one that really stands out to me and I think also has long-lasting effect is Patriots and Trek, because that's the one where Trek kind of had that match. Yep. And then the speed round happened. There were some iffy things with the speed round buzzers, which I think was, we obviously had more speed rounds with the buzzers later on, but I think that's the first chink in the armor where they're like, maybe we should think about something else to do with this, or maybe we should think about upgrading it. And then
they bought new buzzers after that match.
They bought new buzzers. There you go.
Definitely an issue with the buzzers.
There you go. And then you had Trek not getting that Eva question, which I think, again, we didn't get the advent of challenges.
Yeah.
But I think that was one of those. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say you're absolutely right with the buzzers, because when I was going through, and picking out what matches should work. So when I was putting the list together, I was also watching certain matches, and I remember one of the ones I watched before I made a decision that I just wasn't going to talk about the celebrity matches at all because they don't really bring consequence. No. Was the Power Rangers match happened right around this time. And one of the actors from the film, RJ Kyler, made a comment about this buzzer doesn't seem to be working consistently.
That's right.
It's a comment he makes in the match. And it's like, no, so there was definitely an issue with them before they went into this match. So it's interesting that you bring that back up. And you're right, it was a very close match, 28-27 in sudden death. Here's the image after they won. So it was super, and that sudden death back then also used the buzzers.
Also,
So
it was so weird, such a weird way to do sudden death. I'm glad that they changed that. But you had the
Yeah.
Eve Eva thing, and then I think again we didn't get challenges immediately after that. But I think that was the thing that put us on the road to maybe we should consider doing challenges, because I think if they had challenged, I don't know this for sure. I think at the very least the question might have got thrown out, and then maybe Trek gets that and they win, which is insane to think about when you consider the movie trivia careers of JTE and Snyder versus like Inman, who's the IG guy, and Mance, who, what does he have? Like, they have another Trek match after this, and then they're basically gone. He's basically gone. Yeah. He faces Rudnick, I think.
He has a slice.
Yeah, he has a slice, and then that's it. So this one I thought was very interesting, not only because of the microcosm of the match itself, but what it meant further on for changing the rules.
Yeah. JD, go ahead. Which one of these kind of stands out to you?
Well, I want to touch on this one first, and then I'll go into what I think sticks out. We were talking about this, as I said, last time we were doing this, was the fact how a team like Team Trek would never nowadays be in contention for a championship at all. Like, they're not even a Patriot. The idea of like Patriots and Trek being in the same, in competing against each other nowadays seems absolutely insane that something like that actually happened. But one that sticks out to me is kind of Dan, Merle, and Roca for a number of reasons. I mean, number one, it is Merle's first loss at this point, and it was done by Roca, and it begins this long-running rivalry between them. Even throughout season 4, we're going to get back. I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, but the triple threat and like all that. But like, this begins it all. This begins their animosity towards another. Again, that eventually they team up for the past couple of years, and then again, now we're back to kind of. It's interesting that how this kind of like these season 3 and season 4, we're kind of seeing them kind of go back to them this year in season 8. Like the fact that Roca and Merle are on dueling sides again, and then the animosity is back. It's kind of really interesting that it just kind of like there's this weird circle thing going on this season.
Yeah.
And then again, this also kind of begins the as I said, the Roca kind of after this he loses it. But yeah, it's really that's really interesting. Like this begins the fact he can never defend the title that he has, kind of thing. So again, it's interesting for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, and then Jordan, go ahead and get into it. Which one of these kind of stands out to you?
Well, so I wanted to mention 2 of them. So I just wanted to just touch real quick on the team Patriots and Trek match. I almost wonder if this is one of the matches that actually made them think of instigating the JTE rule, because the sheer amount of times that he asked for a repeat. There's even one time where they had to call him out on it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're only gonna give you one more time and no more repeat for it." Like I think he asked for a repeat on one question like 3 times or something like that. So you could definitely see him really milking it like that. And I also want to touch on the Hector Navarro and Robert Meyer Burnett match, just because of the sheer character work that they had. That's one of the things that I really miss about Robert Meyer Burnett, just coming in and screaming Hector Navarro and just like being so intense and everything like that. Like, I mean, I don't want to get into any politics. I definitely won't, but I think he deserves a second chance. I think we'll eventually see Robert Meyer Burnett back in the league in some fashion or another down the road. That's just my thought on it. But I mean, just the rivalry that they had though was just like amazing, and I mean, they went right down to the wire, and I mean, honestly, it could have gone either way, and they had that 4-way match before where Hector Navarro almost won the championship there, but he just missed it just by the skin of his teeth at the end. So I mean, yeah, I think that that's a match that just always stands out in my mind, because I mean, Hector stole it right back from him. So I mean, yeah, it's just the match that that I love. So yeah,
Oh, the days when you could be a champion at 1-1.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
just think it's interesting. I'm sorry I interrupted, but I do think this is an interesting case. The reason it didn't come out to me is because it's an interesting case of like two people that like I don't know. Again, going back to like the Trek thing, I don't know how well they would do nowadays. Like it's an interesting, and like if they competed, like I don't know. Maybe Hector Navarro, maybe, but Burnett, I don't
well,
think Burnett,
well,
I don't think is in the same stratosphere.
Well, I was gonna say it would get brought up. I know for a fact that it's some of the matches I pulled out in the later season. So obviously it won't be a point today. But since you bring it up, it's something that we'll talk about in some of the future videos with those guests. But Hector Navarro quite literally did get stomped out of the Intergeekdom
Oh
League
my
because
God.
Yeah.
he played Adam Holovic, and I'm pretty sure he got knocked out by him.
Yeah.
And then Kevin Smets came in and knocked out Navarro, and then went on to play Holovic and knocked him out too. So they quite literally, he got stomped out of the league quite literally. So it is interesting. And Burnett never really went back into IG. He played Johns and then never played again.
Yep.
But we did see what happened against Finstock, and that's quite a match.
Yep.
Oh,
The
God.
one they played together. So yeah, it is a case of specifically for me, obviously Roka Dan, like I pull up the picture here, it kind of is the beginning of both the friendship and the rivalry. But to me, the Trek match is actually an example. And it's a much longer debate that I think could honestly be had at another time, which is the legitimacy of the Patriots run. In that, like this, like people would say, like, oh, Trek wouldn't hang with them today, but the question is, would the Patriots hang today? Because they barely beat Trek, and this is
Oh, that's a
also a
fair
match in
question.
which you had. This was also a match in which you had no restrictions on rules, no challenges,
Yeah.
and tech issues that went their way.
And
So
Aaron,
it is
there's also, not to interrupt, I'm sorry, but
no,
when you're
please.
thinking about that, there's also, because we don't get into it in this, but I assume you get into it in the next round where, Rotten Tomatoes plays them, or MODOK when they
Yeah.
rebrand themselves. And
Oh,
MODOK
yeah.
had that match in the bag, but
Yep.
they were too character driven and weren't focusing on the trivia, and they lose
Yeah.
the speed round because of it. But they had them dead to rights too.
Absolutely.
It is an interesting question about that. It is a very interesting question. I think like they would be an interesting mid-tier team, but I don't think they would be competing for a championship anymore. If you want to, I think that they would. It took a super team to beat them. It took above the line to beat them, and I think there are a lot more super teams nowadays than there used to be. Like a lot of the teams now are super teams. So again, I think they would be a mid-tier team. They could make things interesting, but I don't think they would. I don't think they beat the Odd Couple. Like again, if there was a world where they could actually the two of them could compete together, I don't think they beat the Odd Couple. I definitely don't think they beat the Founding Fathers. Even we'll see what happens this season, but I don't think they would beat like Ben Bateman or Dan Murrell together. That no chance there.
Shazam,
But
they
like,
wouldn't beat
like,
Shazam. They wouldn't beat Final Exam probably either.
or even KO or like their corruption. I don't think they beat corruption. I don't think they beat
Yeah.
corruption. And that one that one's. I don't think they're kind of a super team, but it's a lot. I feel like in that case is more of like they just fill out their faults so well that they make it a super team as a result more than they're like both super players. Although Chance
That's a
has
good question to bring up, Aaron, though. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's. I mean, you could do a whole hour-long show on that as well, but unfortunately, we don't have that quite time today. Maybe in
Yes.
the future. It's not a bad idea, but maybe in the future. But we'll go ahead and move on. And so, obviously, between kind of the title runs, we have these kind of middling periods, and this period specifically, what I'm focusing on is we had a lot of debuts of players that would both kind of run the distance and run the immediate future. So let's kind of get into some of those. We had Team IGN take on Nerdist, and IGN would win this match by KO 22-8. They would go on to immediately, very quickly, become contenders. Then we had Tough Beats take on Nerds Watch in their debut. Which is Rachel Cushing's first ever match. Uh, Nerds Watch would win 20-18 by TKO. Then we had the Night Sisters take on Team Action, which is both Ben and Andrew's first match in the Schmoedown. They would win this match 18-11 by TKO. Then we had Mark Andraco take on Jay Washington. This would be Jay's first appearance in the Schmoedown. He would actually lose his first match 12-10 to Andraco. And then we had another IG five-way, which is Michelle Boyd, Hal Rudnick, and then more kind of importantly, I believe it was definitely Rachel Cushing and Jason Inman's first appearances in the IG League. And I also believe it was John's first appearance, but I'm not 100% on that. He might have been in the one in December as well.
He was in the one in December.
He was. Okay, so that's probably why he's at the front of this image then. But yeah, so we had a few interesting matches, and actually I'm going to start with the IG one on this because this is something that we discussed in the last one, which is the format for IG was very different for the first few five ways. They played with this format where they would erase the scores at the end of every round. And so the final scores for this match were Michelle Boyd had 5, Hal Rudnick had 0, Rachel Cushing had 22, Jason Inman had 13, and Jeremy Johns had 16. But Jeremy Johns wins the match. So it's another example where a decent point gap stood between the actual leader of the match and the person who ended up winning because of the way they ran the format. And that's actually not the last time we'd see that happen in IG. So I think it is kind of an interesting talking point about why the change of format came, because consistently the person who played the best was not winning the match. Not that Johns played bad. Again, 16 points when you have Rudnick getting 0 isn't a bad score at all, but it certainly is very interesting.
It is, and especially afterwards. I don't know if we're going to get to it, but he doesn't win the next one. So I think it would have been a more interesting match if Rachel Cushing or even Inman, and especially where their IG careers eventually went, both of those two. We talk about Inman and Rachel Cushing IG wise far more than we talk about Jeremy Johns.
Johns did beat Robert Meyer Burnett and get into the title.
So that match isn't in the series that we're going to bring up, but he does go on to beat Burnett for a title shot, which we will get to later in the video.
I was talking about the title.
Right, but he does go on to win. He does beat the former champ at that point to get a title shot. So I wouldn't say it was wasted. It was just because he did play well. It's the early days of IG are a very interesting league. And it is kind of funny to see that, again, we'll get to another one in a little bit, where the people who would really go on to do great started out in this weird scenario where they kind of got boxed out of a win. But JD, I'll go to you first. What other matches in this kind of stand out to you? Because we had a lot of interesting debuts happen here.
The IGN one and Nerdist one kind of sticks out to me for a number of reasons, because I remember after that match day one, they were, and I was included in this, I thought they were going to be the next champs. I truly did. In scheduling conflicts and the fact that the league changed partway kind of through their run really altered the next when they came back, really altered their run. And again, Jim Vejvoda, I think he has the potential to be a really good player, because he was the one that was always standing out. Jim Vejvoda had an insane average, but he just never had the time to learn how to play the game. And I don't know if he has the time or interest to do so. I mean, he says that he does, but it so far hasn't really
he didn't open himself up to season 8. And I think that kind of answers the question. Yeah. At least for the moment.
Yeah, I think he's never had the time. It's honestly because he could be a dangerous player with a couple of tweaks of strategy and gameplay. That's all he really needs. I feel that we've seen the difference of Perry Neveroff. She tweaked a couple things, and that's another interesting one. Tough Beats. Oh my God, Tough Beats. They had amazing entrances, but they never, unfortunately, just got it together, and a couple match later, you know, they're gone. They're just gone.
Yeah.
It's
So I was gonna say, Jordan, I'll move on to you next. Which one of these matches kind of stands out to you?
Well, I was gonna say the Tough Beats and Nerds Watch just because,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I think Perry Nemiroff, like she's a solid competitor, and I just think that if she got paired up with the right person, that would really complement her, because she's always been kind of paired up with people that kind of have the same strengths as her. And I feel like so that they're really good in some categories and not in others.
I was gonna say, not to cut you off, but it is kind of funny because when you think back to that time, nowadays people talk about her as the better one because I guess she's still competing, but Jonathan was actually seen as far and away the better player.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. So
the question back then would have been who's the better partner for him, not for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Interesting.
But now we got a new question that kind of goes the other way around, at least for me. But I mean, and also Nerds Watch too. Like I'm just so glad that they were a team and we got Rachel Cushing in the league, because I feel like she's probably done more for the league almost than like anyone in the league, honestly. I mean, so it's like and like when you look at her, like especially when she debuted, she's kind of like a little timid. She's obviously an introvert, so she doesn't really seem that formidable of a opponent to go up against. But she's a powerhouse. Like you just see the way that she just dominates like everything, especially in her geekdom. So it's just like yeah, that match stands out for that reason. And yeah, I kind of felt like Ken Knapsack, I kind of feel like he never really wanted to compete. He was just kind of shoehorned in. Maybe Christian put some pressure on him to compete, and so they just kind of made him do it. But I don't think he even really wanted to be part of the league, honestly. But he just likes being around his friends, which is fair enough. But still, yeah, I really like that match though.
Ken Knapsack has even said like he's even admitted as much as like this not on his radar at all. Rachel Cushing was scouted by Clark Wolf, or at least that's the story that they go with, and that Ken Knapsack basically, you know, was asked by Christian to be her teammate. That's basically what happened. I do think that, speaking of the good teammate for Perry Nemiroff has never had a good teammate. I slightly disagree with the witching hour. The witching power. We will never know. But I will say that they just ran into the founding fathers in their first match. I think that was I don't necessarily think that they were a bad team, and the fact that they took them as far as they did suggests that they're probably would have been a very powerful team against most other people. It was just that they ran into the founding fathers first. But yeah, it is an interesting. Yeah, it was an interesting time. It was like just how much a couple tweaks in gameplay and, as I said, strategy made Perry Nemiroff a dangerous, solid player.
Yep.
Yeah, and Robert, to you, which one of these kind of stands out to you before we move on?
I'll just go to Night Sisters in action. I mean, we get the creation, we get the revelation, the genesis of Team Action being great heels, and the dynamic of them were interesting at the beginning because we didn't really know who was the better player at that time, honestly, because Bateman was not to the degree that Bateman is now, and Guy was actually like caring about trivia stuff at the time, so they kind of played off each other really well. And then we didn't get where the belts yet, but we kind of saw the avenue coming into the point where they were ready to go where's the belts. And I was surprised. I thought this was a whitewash of epic proportions. And then I went back and I was like, the Night Sisters were somewhat into. I mean, they made it to the third round.
They did. There were some questions knocked out.
Yeah, there were some questions that I think they could have gotten. Emma Fyfe, not known for IG, not necessarily known for singles or teams, and I think that kind of showed up here. But I'll just say Action for the advent of their personalities. Their entrance, the Top Gun where they wear the suits and they do the music was really good, and their post interviews where they just don't care and they're just ready for any challengers. And we got to see that they were actually pretty good too.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is.
And
Sorry, go first. Go first.
well, no, go ahead and quickly finish the point up because I was
Yeah,
going to
no,
go
no.
ahead and
I was going to
also.
say, I think most people would say like Guy was probably actually the better singles player at the time, or the better player at the time, believe it or not. Especially like a season or so later, you'll get like the run where he beats Merle, he beats Riley,
Riley.
and he almost beats Roca. Which so and Bateman was just like Bateman was the complete opposite. It was like he was losing every singles match that he had. So I think at that time you actually probably you would say Guy was the better player of the two.
And
Yeah,
also
and
too, well, sorry to interrupt, but I want to just touch on team action real quick. Is that the way the league was at this time? I feel like it was just tailor made for a team action. I mean, they weren't really caring about copyright restrictions on their music. They were able to swear. They were able to just come in and just like be their like bombastic self, kind of vulgar, and call people a bitch and all this crazy stuff. And for those reasons, and not just those reasons, for a lot of other reasons, but Team Action, my favorite team of all time. I love Team Action, and I don't really think that they'd really thrive in the way that the Schmoedown is now. I feel like back then they did great, but individually that they have opportunities to thrive, definitely. But as a team, I don't think that that the dynamic, the way the Schmoedown is now, really works in their favor. I just don't feel it.
Again, I think they're a mid-tier team. I think they would be a mid-tier team. They'd make some things very interesting with certain teams, and then they'll run into a super team, and the super team would beat them. I feel like that's what it's just. Unfortunately, it's the era of the super teams. And I don't think to be like in the top level, you have to be a super team.
yeah. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next set of matches. So up next, so obviously we had some other matches in the middle, kind of the build up to the next set of title matches, which is what we're going to go over next. And we're going to go over one of those build up matches as well. We had a repeat match in the Schmoes versus Top 10, which would not only be the final appearance of the Schmoes as teams. Top 10 would win 26-24 to go into the title shot. Then we would get the first ever regulation Star Wars match, which unfortunately is the one I missed the graphic on. I got 24 out of 25 or whatever it is. We had Ken Napzok, Jenny Nicholson, Jeremy Johns, John Campia, and Sam Witwer all compete. That match would end in a reflective score of 34, 10, 27, 33, and 24, with Ken Napzok taking the first ever Star Wars title. Then we had John Roca take on Mark Riley for the singles title. Riley would win that one at a score of 18-16 and become the singles champ once again. And then we would have the Patriots take on the Wolves of Steel, and that match would end 26-25 on another win for the Patriots on their run. So I'll go ahead and turn it down to Robert first. Which of these matches kind of stands out to you?
The one I enjoy the most, because I think when we think about Wolves of Steel, I think we think about them as like almost there but never getting it. And there's a disappointment, especially as we get further along in this season with Riley, and he starts taking a step back, and then we eventually get the creation of the Shire Wolves. But I really like Patriots and Wolves of Steel. I thought their introduction, you were talking about Jordan not caring about copyrighted music. I mean, they use freaking Thriller, and they dance Thriller. I mean, that's freaking awesome.
That is
It was really close. I think there was a clear disparity between how the teams worked together, even though I know Riley and Clark had worked very well together, and they came together as part of the Schmoes Know, like, big announcement. She didn't want to go with JTE, and then JTE chooses Schneider and all that nonsense. But I mean, Wolves of Steel lost in the last question. I think the Patriots had 2 additional questions, but I really love that match. I really like the dynamic between, they were really super faces at that point, and then versus these super heels. And I just really enjoyed that team all the time, because I think Clark was able to kind of bring the dynamic of doing these cool entrances and all these things, bringing Riley out of his shell a little bit, and then how that then dovetailed and how that connected with how Rachel would do her intros for Shirewolves. So I really enjoy that particular match.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll jump back up to Jordan. Which of these matches kind of stands out to you?
So I got to go with Mark Riley and v. John Roca, just because. Well, also for the intro, I mean, he came in as the Karate Kid. You know, did the best around, which is probably one of my favorite entrances of all time. And yeah, and I mean, I don't know what really happened to Mark Riley currently. I mean, I think that's just the way that the league has evolved. He's just not really at the level that he once was, and there's a lot way more tougher competition. But I mean, and also shows, like we mentioned earlier, that JD mentioned that John Roca not being able to defend his belts, and so it's just one of those things that just kind of like made people, I think, kind of maybe fear John Roca a little less, kind of, because like, oh yeah, we do see a chink in his armor. He's not able to hang in there when he's under some real pressure, you know, that type of thing. But I mean, the match overall was great. I mean, it was another super close match, but I mean, yeah, I just think that's a match that's really always stuck out with me, like, all time for me.
This is really the start of the downfall of Roca and the Four Horsemen. So it really is.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then JD, before we move on, which one of these kind of stands out to you?
Well, briefly, real quick, before I go into that, I want to touch on the Riley and Roca match, because I just want to say that angry Mark Riley is my favorite Mark Riley, and this match really comes out like Mark Riley is the ultimate face. We all agree about this. You can never turn him heel, no matter how much they try and maybe want him to. But like we saw in this match that like he has a temper, and when he blows up, he really blows up. And I love seeing that side of Riley. Like it's my favorite side of Riley, and brings some interest. This match brings some very interesting layers to him, that he can dish it as much as he can take it. But yeah. I do the Ken Knapsack and Campia match. Yep. That one really stands out to me because I do love the Star Wars division. It's probably my favorite division to competition wise to watch. Like just pure competition wise. The amount of knowledge you have to know for those kind of things, even like watching these back then, I had no idea about a lot of these questions back then. And these were more simple questions than we have even now. I think that's why Ken Knapsack runs into so many problems and why we don't really see him in the Star Wars division anymore. But Ken Knapsack was our first champion. He was this time was very, you could have a Star Wars player like Ken Knapsack do really well. This one really solidified to me that like competition wise, this was my favorite division to really watch.
And I think it's not exactly the same as the one we talked about, the 5-Way Inner Geekdom, where Rachel was dominating and then somebody just kind of swept up and took it. But I mean, Whitwer hadn't missed up until the last two questions. And obviously he brought about that going through Celebration and doing all the panels and stuff, he was tired, and it kind of seemed like that. But it just kind of set up that even though the dynamics of how the match was run wasn't that bad, it kind of made you seem like, did really the right person win that match? You had that question, which is why then later on in the season we get the 5-way. Interestingly enough, Whitwer and Alex Damon and Scrimshaw and the other two people, and somehow Damon doesn't win, Whitwer does, and then he comes in and takes the title, and then he has to vacate it. But it's one of those where you're like, did the right person actually win? Because Whitwer was so dominant.
And Whitwer, another thing.
Well, I was going to say, and it should be said that this is, out of all the kind of 5 ways they had at the time, the IG ones, this was actually the closest, because with the exception of Jenny Nicholson, who scored 10 points, Knapsack had 34, Campia had 33, Johns had 27, and Whitwer was actually fourth of those four with 24.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to see, but they were right on each other's heels, less than a 10-point difference between four players. So they were very, very dominant. For me, before we move on, I'll go to the one match that no one talked about because I think it is interesting to bring up, which is the top 10 and the Schmoes match. Because honestly, it is interesting that this would be, and obviously, as the league grew, you saw that the two of them whether it was clearly intentional or on Ellis's part, kind of just very slyly started putting the focus more on everybody else and less on themselves. And it was kind of interesting that it was just like, well, we lost this match. I guess we're done. And that was kind of it for them, And then obviously Christian would go on to have his run. Mark had his run the previous season, never really got there again. But it is interesting that this is kind of the beginning of the end for them in terms of their playing in the Schmoedown, because once Christian loses the title down the road, he's done. And I believe at the end of this season, Ellis also finished because he ended up losing a few more matches and retired.
Lost the Stacey Howard one where he did the doctor thing. Yeah, it's crazy. They had that match in the bag too.
They were 24-26.
All Ellis had to do was stop when he said Spider-Man, and they win. That's it.
Yeah.
And yet they just break up. It's crazy to me, but it happens, so we can't go back.
And it until the Patriots take it, like it was an interesting kind of the singles or the teams division belt was like you'd win it and then you couldn't defend it. You win it, you couldn't defend it, and then as we'll get to the Patriots match, I'm sure where they actually win it, that begins the run of the wrong reigning Patriots. But it is an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on then into the next set of matches. And then obviously, at this point, we're almost at about the halfway point. We're building up to Collision. But we had a few matches happen right before we got there. Obviously, one big one that I will get to separately, but the three matches I'll introduce now. We had another 5-way IG match that saw a few big players come in. We had Charlie Feldman, Coy Jandreau, Erica Ishii, Emma Fife, and Mike Kalinowski, this being the IG debuts of Jandreau, Fife, and Kalinowski. And this is another example of the best player who played didn't win. Charlie Feldman scored 4, Jandreau scored 17, Ishii scored 8, Fife scored 13, Kalinowski scored 23. However, due to the format, Coy would end up being the winner of this match. And the other two matches we saw that came in this era are not maybe thought about as much, but are very big trendsetters for the future of the Schmoedown in people who were just fans getting the chance to move over and play. Obviously, this week we just had our first set of matches go up, and 3 of the 6 competitors that played in Amaru Moses, Jesse Swift, and Marisol McKee were all very, very solidly fans who have had the chance to step up and play. Well, these were the first 2 matches. We had the team late to the party make their debut against the up-and-comers Team Action. This would end 31-28 with Team Action taking the victory. And then we had Matt Atchity make his singles debut against Tim Franco, and Franco would actually win this 16-15 by way of TKO. So I'll go ahead and, to me, again, I'm going to start it with the IG one just because, again, it's a continuation. Kalinowski, a player who would go on to have a big part to play in the evolution of the IG League, playing the best and not getting the win. It is really interesting when I started looking at all the stats, and it's like this was a consistent thing that was happening in these 5 ways, where the person who probably played the best was not getting the victory, and I think that's a really interesting pattern they followed, and we see that stop when they change the format so that you make it foolproof. The person who plays the best has to win, really, outside of major comebacks. But I'll go ahead and go to Jordan first. Out of these 3 matches, which of them kind of stands out to you?
Well, I do want to touch just briefly on the IG match a little bit, just because, for me, I never really bought Mike Kalinowski as a face. He's just there's always a heel to me, and I think as a heel, he plays better. And he still dominated this match, but he didn't end up winning. So it's one of those things where the person who really kind of dominated the match didn't end up winning it. But then also I want to mention the Matt Atchity Tim Franco match, just because we don't really see Tim Franco that much. I think that he has a lot of scheduling issues, and back when they were were doing live matches, he wasn't able to really make it out to the matches very often. But I mean, Matt actually, I mean, he's a powerhouse when he's not giving away matches at the very end, you know, like that one where he had to go back on the question. But I mean, yeah, like I would like to see Tim Franco a lot more in the league, and hopefully we'll get a chance to. But I mean, yeah, like that was a pretty solid match to start, but then obviously Tim Franco kind of went away with it at the end, and so I mean, it's just, but yeah, these are some of the matches I really like though. Like I like seeing some of the smaller players get a chance, and yeah, so like I look forward to all the matches, but honestly, my favorite ones are some of the smaller matches. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, and it is interesting. If I remember correctly, I believe, despite the fact that, because he was not drafted and is not a part of the league this year, but for a player who is technically on active roster for 4 seasons, Tim only played 4 matches. He played 2 teams matches with Stacy, and he played 2 singles matches, I believe. The one against Matt, and then he played one in the tournament last year that he lost. So it is very funny. It's against Tom, that is it. Yeah, and it's another case of a player who was very hyped upon debuting that just through kind of circumstance never really got there. Robert, I go to you next. Which one of these kind of stands out to you out of these 3?
You kind of mentioned kind of the bigger part about the IG match, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the match we haven't talked about, which was the first advent of fans coming in, Action versus Late to the Party. You always got the sense, even though this was played up for character, that Action felt this was beneath them all the time. And they have the great intro where they come in with the sofas and like, we're reactors. Yeah. But I mean, this was, I think, connecting this with Franco's match. I kind of thought this was Late to the Party's like high point, even though I know they beat Critically Acclaimed in the tournament. I thought Robert played the best in this, and just Vanessa
never played better.
Vanessa was a little lacking in this one, unfortunately, and then that kind of continues down the road to the point where they're not really playing as much anymore. But I was surprised at how
I don't believe any 3 of them are actually in the league this year. They all got picked up in the free agency last year. I don't believe any of them were drafted. They got picked up in free agency. And then, Robert played and lost. Tim played and lost. Vanessa never even played. And now they're not in the league this year, which is kind of sad to see considering they're the OG fans. But I guess it is an interesting debate of fans versus fan leaguers, because following them we saw players like Chance come in and he's obviously hung around and won championships and he's like proven himself. But then, and I forget the gentleman's name, so I do apologize. I know it's a match I haven't pulled for whatever season it aired in, but there was a guy, I think the girl's name he played was Rosie Knight, but there was a guy who was another fan who came in and played, and he was another one and done. He played a match, he was a fan, he lost, he never appeared again.
Yep.
And it is an interesting distinction of the fans who come from the fan leagues do consistently seem to hang around. I mean, the only one who I believe has found any kind of success, even just in terms of winning, is Jader, and even Jader had to play something to get in.
Yeah.
So it is a really interesting dynamic. Sorry, finish your point though. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. I was gonna say Late to the Party probably had an advantage because they're one of the reactors who played along, which wasn't always the case with all the reactors. So fan league, they were kind of a hybrid of sorts. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of like a high point for Robert. He gets perfect in that, and he gets the bonus in the first round. They were right there with Action. I just think that they got some tough questions, but I really enjoy that out of this crop just because of what you mentioned. It's the first one where we get people who aren't Schmoedown or Schmoedown adjacent personalities who are in it. And we can see that people from other scopes and universes can compete in this league. You don't just have to be in the Schmoedown universe and know of it. If you've watched it, you can kind of gain expertise and use that to your advantage.
Right, absolutely.
Is Tim Franco, is he a fan of a friend of Late to the Party? Is that how we got him?
He was on their channel, so he was also technically late to the party. It's just they brought 3. I think there was 4 of them who were on the channel. And they brought 2 of them in and made a team, and then Tim came in and played singles. It was part of a marketing week they did.
Yep.
Yeah. So hold on, I have to step off for just 1 sec, but while I do, JD, go ahead and get into your favorite of these before we go ahead and move on.
I mean, I think they touched on all of them, but I do think my favorite is probably Team Action and Late to the Party for that entrance alone. I mean, I think to me that that solidified to me that Team Action were heels. Like the first match, there was a little bit of stuff that, but they weren't like, I think this is like what solidified their characters is like, this league is beneath us. This league, these fan leaguers, what did they think, or these fan reactors, what did they think they're doing here? They're not worth our time. Like
And
that
I believe,
really
sorry to cut you.
solidified the Team Action kind of brand that they did for the Schmoedown, or their personalities for the Schmoedown.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, and I believe this was also the first one where they did the "Where's the belts." I believe this might have come from this one because I know they lost before this. They went 1-1.
I don't think so, Aaron. Actually, if I recall,
maybe
I think they got close to it, but I think it was actually after they lose the Nerds Watch match later on is when I actually think they start doing it, because I think they felt that was another, like, this is a continuation of, we got put into a match that we really shouldn't have because we've played more and we're better. So I think it was actually that one. But your point, like I said before, when they played their first match really against Night Sisters, we could already see that they were gearing up.
They were going on that road.
Yeah.
So we'll move on, and we're almost at Collision. But before we get to the Collision, there is one match in between we can kind of briefly go around and talk about. Because it is an important one to bring up, which was that pickup, which it's kind of weird to think about how they did it separately from the event. Nowadays, this would just be held on and be a part of the event. But as a July 4th special, we had the Patriots taking on Top 10 in what was their second title match. And this would be the first of two Top 10 matches that would bring controversy as they finished 27-20 by TKO. Robert, I'm going to go ahead and go to you on this one first. Talk about it, man. This match.
This was hyped up, right? They lost, Top 10 losses, Belt to Spectacular on a crazy-ass pull, or so it seemed like a crazy-ass pull by Schneider on, We End the Night. And then they go and they beat Schmoes, albeit, again, Schmoes had them dead to rights, and they let him off the hook. But it's still Roca. He's still, he just lost the belt, so he's a little bit feeling down on himself. But he's thinking about, this is a big week for him. He could get 2 belts. He could be the first 2-belted guy. And this one wasn't even close. I mean, like, the Patriots were dominant in this one. And JTE, if I remember correctly, this is one where JTE was kind of like the better of the two, or he was the more vocal or knew more of the answers. And I think this is another one. Again, I really hate the speed round. I really hate it. I think this is one where the speed round just destroyed Top 10. They could never recover from that. They got down on themselves, and it showed in the third round. So we were expecting this big hype up, especially going into Collision as the entree or the appetizer or whatever you want to say. And it didn't really show out. And again, we're continuing this downward trajectory of Roca. Nost played better than him in that match. And if that happens, they're not in a good position ever. It's never been the case where Nost is better than Roca and they win the game. If that happens,
it's all on Roca. Because Nost was usually consistently decent. So it was really up to Roca. Is Roca going to step up and be the A player, or is Roca shrunk under the hat or mask or whatever he's wearing that day? And today was definitely, and it is funny you bring up the speed round, because in their obviously this is another sect of another season, but in their final match they play together, I believe that was the one where the Jane Fonda incident happens, and obviously that throws them off. But then the speed round again, that same dominance in the speed round where it only took a question or two, and you could just see they'd given up. They were like, "F this, we're done. Who cares?"
I think that was really JTE's equalizer, right? I think the speed round is really what helped Sam Levine too, obviously down the road. But it was really JTE's equalizer, and when that kind of left, I don't want to say he wasn't as good of a player, but I really think it took an advantage away from him, which is probably part of the reason, along with all the other extracurricular stuff that he had going on, why we haven't seen him in so long, and times we have seen him, he hasn't been as good.
Yeah. Jordan, JD, any brief comments on it before we move on to the Collision?
I mean, it's kind of interesting that what was it? There is controversy with this match, but I do think it's interesting. Even today, Roca as a player, like, he wins a cup, he wins a few, he loses. He wins a few, he loses. And you can normally see the pattern. He's normally like, he wins 2, loses. Wins 3, loses a match. So like even like so like this was like the fourth match. It was always like the fourth match. He would always lose the fourth match during this time. So like this was the fourth match that he played, and this was the fourth match he lost. You can strategically got this down. Like again, he'd always lose on every fourth match he would lose. So he'd win 3, and then he'd lose. So this was the fourth match he lost.
Yeah. Then Jordan, any thoughts before we move on?
Well, just brief. Is that yeah? I think that the speed round was like there's something about JTE and the speed round. Like he always dominated in the speed round, and yeah, like even earlier this season, I forget who they played earlier, but like he dominated in that match as well, and yeah, and I think that like probably even if top 10 would have played a little better, I still think Patriots would have came out on top. And I don't really understand what it is about, and JTE especially more than Jeff Snyder, but why he's such an amazing team player, maybe one of the best team players that has ever been in the league, but then just a horrible singles player. He just is not a good singles player. So it's just
I think
And to be fair, I was gonna say I don't want to, because we're running a little short on time. I don't want to jump into another longer discussion on it, but I'll just say before we move on, I think Schneider and JTE are both victims of that, and that especially comes off the heels of the recent pay-per-view against Dan. In singles, Schneider can get to those number one contenders matches, but he's like 1-4 in number one contenders matches, and his only title shot he's lost, so he is consistently got there and then crap the bed.
Yes.
And this time again, I would say, I've seen people in the comments go, well, Dan didn't beat him, Jeff lost it, and I was like, I think that's worse. That's a worse description if that's what you have to say. But we're gonna go ahead and move it on just because we're running a little short on time. Might have to go a little over, but we're going on to the Collision. And this was the first time they ever did this event, kind of mimicking the Spectacular. Midway through the year, a card of matches, and we had the Teams League number one contenders match, Rotten Tomatoes taking on the Nerds Watch. We had the Inner Geekdom Championship, Hector Navarro defending against Jeremy Johns, who just beat Robert Meyer Burnett. We had the number one contenders match in singles, Jeff Snyder taking on Christian Harloff. And then we had the triple threat championship match, Mark Riley defending against the only two people who had won the title besides him, Dan Merle and John Roca. We're going to go through this kind of briefly match by match, and we'll go to the first one. Rotten Tomatoes takes on the Nerds Watch in a match that ends 25-23. Rotten Tomatoes win in the third round. We'll go around quickly. I'll start with JD. What are your brief thoughts on that match?
Well, I do think, to me, like Rotten Tomatoes, speaking of like, the Wolves of Steel, it's the best team that like never got a belt. Like one of those another, like I think of Who's the Boss when I think about this. I think of Wolves of Steel, and I also think of Rotten Tomatoes and eventually MODOK. Like they were a team that consistently were in the title picture for however throughout their run, and it was always because of, again, they were just busy people, or again they just they didn't play their best match that day. That's when they got it. And they were such fun personalities too. Like Gray Drake and Matt Atchity were fun personalities. I loved their kind of like their rock again when they become MODOK, their Rocky and Bullwinkle villain type just thing. It brought me back. It is what it is. But yeah, that it's another one of those teams that like just almost there, never got it.
Yeah, Jordan, brief thoughts on the match?
Yeah, and I'm of the same mindset as JD. Like they're one of those teams that's just really solid and never really won a championship, never really got there, and they definitely had opportunities, but I feel like if they were to compete now, they wouldn't even be near the top. But for back then, they're actually pretty formidable, and I mean they just could never get it done. And I mean, nerds watch. I mean, I just think that honestly, like, there's no slight on Ken Knapsack, but it was all Rachel, that team. So I mean, I honestly think Rachel could have taken on some of these teams on their own, which she actually did in one match. But yeah, that's just kind of my little brief thoughts.
I kind of
and then Robert, thoughts on the match?
I kind of agree and disagree real quick on that Nerds Watch part. I agree that Rachel, looking back, was probably the more dominant player, but those first couple matches, Ken Knapsack was probably the more consistent player. She had like a match or two that were like a match or so that was so. But it's interesting. It's interesting.
All right, and then Robert, brief thoughts on the match.
This is the first match. It connective tissue to what JD was saying about the MODOK match when they play Patriots, but it's like when their characters sort of took over, because Gray kept asking sister, Mary, whatever, versus and I thought watching back on it, there was a little bit of Matt Atchity getting a little bit frustrated with it because he kind of wanted to win. He'd already lost the match to Franco before, but I thought there was a little bit of that. I disagree on both hands. I think Rachel was clearly the dominant player, but in the first couple matches, especially in the first round, Ken was really good, because after this match, JTE does come in and challenge Knapsack to a singles match, and Ken's like, "Did you see my first round? I'm actually pretty good. You just don't see it because you're living in this narrative." But I think this was the first match where the lights got to Rachel. Right, the lights got to Rachel. She's right there. Yeah. They stumbled a little bit in the second round, couldn't get the last question right, and that's just how we ended up with Rotten Tomatoes. But Rotten Tomatoes was good. They beat IGN. I think that was the more impressive win technically. But I mean, they probably should have won a title, as we talked about earlier.
Right. So then we move on. The second match of the day, as we said, was Hector Navarro taking on Jeremy Johns. And that match ended another very close one, but Hector keeps his title, the first IG champ of now currently only 3 to defend, 29-26 against Jeremy Johns. Robert, I go to you first. What are your brief thoughts on the match?
I mean, it looked like Johns was in control that whole match, frankly, and then Hector pulls the Harry Lennox pull, which is insane. And then we get scores and soundtracks where I think Jeremy gets in his own head, and they're like, "What's the song from Iron Man?" And he's going, "Da da 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 da," and he knows what it is. He just can't remember the freaking name of it, and he loses. And you're like, "Jeremy, that was it. You had it." But I think the interesting part of that in an alternate reality would have been if he wins the belt, considering we know that he moves out of the Southern California area
very soon. Yeah.
What happened? I mean, I assume he just vacates the belt. So what does it really do in the long run? So even though I think Jeremy actually should have won that match, I think Hector's a better player overall, but I think he played better in that match. It would have just been interesting in an alt universe type of situation. What happens with the belt and Johns after he leaves? Because we didn't do this interactive format till last year. So more than likely they would have vacated it, and then it would have been interesting to see the power back.
I think just briefly before I move on to one of the other guys, I actually think if he had won it, he wouldn't have vacated it. Whitweir was a bit of a different scenario because he just had no interest in playing again. Whereas with Jeremy, and he's even said, like, he lives in Seattle, but as a critic, he finds himself in LA a lot. He just didn't enjoy living in LA, so once his contract with Collider was up, he moved back.
Yeah.
And so I think if they could have Alex live in Atlanta and he could still defend by going to LA a couple times a year, I think Jeremy certainly could have made it down from Seattle. But you're right, it is one of those, well, you never quite know type of things. But I think just because by nature of his job, he's there a lot anyways. So he probably could have done it. I just think he didn't have any interest in competing again is what it was once he lost. Because I don't think he ever played again.
He didn't. No.
So, yeah. So, JD, brief thoughts on the match before we move on?
Yeah, I just said it is interesting that, like I said, this is Hector Navarro is one of 3 people to actually defend this belt. Is that at the time it seemed like this belt was defendable, and then like after this, until Inman does it again, or Inman defends it again.
Inman, I think Inman beats Navarro, and then Inman defends, and then that's when it begins. It's just tumbling hands.
Yeah, I forget that, like, these timelines are like really, like, they string together.
4, 5, and 6, really, honestly.
Yeah, 4, 5, and 6 string together. Like I struggle with keeping all of these together. But yeah, I as I said, it's hard to think that this belt was defendable. Like this people defended this belt because it's based on what happens after, as I said, Inman. You don't see that again.
Yeah, and then Jordan, brief thoughts before we go ahead and move on.
Yeah. So, like how you say, like how the timelines kind of blur together a little bit. Even matches do for me sometimes. Like so earlier in the season, you had Robert Burnett playing Hector Navarro, and then Jason Inman comes in to do the little challenge thing, and he's like, "Sit your ass down. You're not going to play," that kind of thing. And so, but for this match, like I mean, yeah, like I really think that honestly it could have gone either way, and it's pretty interesting to think about the alternate reality scenario. I mean, maybe if Jeremy Jones would have won, maybe that would have kept him in LA a little longer. Maybe would have gotten a few more matches out of him, possibly, and like who knows what would have happened if he would have maybe had a chance to defend, or if he would have lost. I mean, who knows? But it's just kind of interesting to think about that. But yeah, but Navarro's just kind of one of those guys who's like fairly dominant in the Inner Geekdom, but at the same time, all of his matches, especially the title matches that he's had, have been super close. I mean, and then every time he just squeaks out those wins. So I mean, yeah, it's like who knows, but
yeah. So we move on to the third match of the day was the number one contenders match in singles. We had Jeff Snyder taking on Christian Harloff in a match that ended 21-18. Christian wins in the third round, gets his chance at a title shot. A title shot that, per his own words at the time, he didn't want, which is the weirdest dynamic in the world. You say you keep playing till you lose, and then you're finished, and you just keep winning. It's a really interesting match, and actually it's funny, it's another example of what we were just talking about Snyder kind of crapping the bed in singles. He's very good, and then he gets those opportunities and he never takes them. He lost to Christian. I mean, he laid down on his belly when it came to playing Bibbs in that match. He couldn't beat Oyama when he got to the title, and then he's just lost to Dan recently, and he lost to Adam. That's the other one where it's the four. So yeah, it is very interesting how he's so close but can just never get there. I'll go to you, Robert, first. What are your brief thoughts on the match?
Most controversial match ever, especially in this one. I mean, Snyder wants to challenge everything. It's really one where he tried to use his gamesmanship to take hold because, I mean, Lions Den thought this was a match that should be in protest because, you know, Christian gets Arnie and Sly, he gets scores and soundtracks. He doesn't know if he wants to answer the questions right. We get the challenge about, is a flute a wind instrument or a wood instrument when it's a woodwind instrument? So stupid. And I forget what the other challenge was that, and then Draco has the thing about how the Brandy song isn't really about Peter and his dad and Guardians 2 when it clearly is, and he talks about it. And you have Christian, which, by the way, this match would not fly at all because Christian writes good as it gets as opposed to as good as it gets, and he gets a point, which is ridiculous. This one is so controversial. It's hilarious. I really just like how much Schneider has to stew in it, though. So I really enjoyed that part of it, and I enjoyed the aftermath of it, given how much Draco got to speak up and how frustrated he was, which we didn't get any of to that point.
Right. And it is funny, obviously, not something we'll speak on as we're almost finished, but also the last good match we'd ever get from Christian, because I don't think anyone could say either of his title shots were good matches.
These matches were awful.
So, JD, brief thoughts on the match before we move on.
Yeah, this was, I guess this is right after his revenge tour. Like he basically revenges tour right into the number one contender match, which is interesting. Again, and then right afterwards, it's like he doesn't want the title shot. He doesn't want the title shot, but he wins anyways. It's like the thing that he doesn't want to do, but yet at the same time, in the same breath, he'll say, "But I'm still going to put on a good show. I'm still going to do my best regardless." So then you win. So it's really interesting, and he'll feel really bad afterwards because the first title shot that he had, I know, but it brought up a funny moment when you said that, he said he doesn't want to win, but yet he wins anyways. he feels really bad about it afterwards because Dan Murrow retires in his next match.
Right. Yes. Which that's
and
something we'll get to next time.
yeah,
Yeah. Jordan, brief thoughts on the match.
I just feel like the whole storyline of Harloff saying he doesn't want to play, but he's going to keep playing until he wins. Like, I kind of feel like that was just brought up to honestly stir up controversy, just make people think something's going on, and just to be just kind of a bit of an entertaining storyline, I feel like. And
so I misquoted a little bit. So to kind of, the storyline was after, because they stopped being a team, Ellis retires not long after this, and so Harloff in kind of that same manner says, I want to play everyone that I've ever lost to,
yes,
and once I lose again, then I'm done. And he just so happens to beat all of them, has enough wins that it garners a number one contenders match against Snyder, then he beats him, and then obviously he does go on to win his own title. Sorry, Jordan, go ahead and finish up your thought.
Well, the matches made me laugh all the way around, just the ridiculous challenges and and then at the end, and like how Robert said that like Draco get really pissed off and stuff at the end, which was overall pretty entertaining. So I mean, for what it's worth, like I thought that it was a very entertaining match. It just kind of made me laugh because it just kind of like one of those matches that's just all over the place for me. So
yeah. And then we'll go ahead and get into the final match of the collision, which was the triple threat titles shot, which Mark Riley versus Dan Murrell versus John Roca, which ends here. Riley ends with 13 points. Roca ends with 22 points, and Murrell ends with 26 points, taking the title back from Riley, defeating Roca. I guess at the time, making him kind of the ultimate champion. That was kind of the point of this, was only 3 people have had it. Let's put them against each other and see who wins. I'll go ahead and go to Jordan first. What are your brief thoughts on the match?
Well, I just think that it's kind of like you said, like it just solidified Dan as being the GOAT even this early in his career. I mean, soon after he retires, so he retires on top, so it's kind of like just giving him that moniker, kind of like a Michael Jordan, you know. So yeah, I mean, I thought that it was fun to have that as a main event at the Collision, and yeah, like I enjoyed it. I don't really have a lot to say. I mean, other than I kind of think that really in the end it really came down to Murrow v. Roca, because Riley just kind of like he didn't really hang in there. So yeah.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and go to Robert next. What are your thoughts on it?
This is one of my favorite matches ever. I like going back and revisiting it because of having this triple threat dynamic in a singles match for a title, which is the first time it ever happened. Yeah, Riley was clearly outclassed. In the second round, everybody gets what they want. Murrell and Roca get Spinner's Choice, and Riley gets Horror Thriller. But Riley's Horror Thriller questions were like way harder than everybody else's somehow. I don't know how. And then he just couldn't catch up in the third round. It looked like Roca had that match for the majority of it, and then he misses 2 layups with Calvin Klein, and he's like, if I would have heard the green room question, they said bald, I would have got that one too, and he would have needed to have gotten both of them to win, but and then right. Dan misses his 3-pointer, and he has to come back in the 5 and get it. I really enjoy this match because of the dynamics of them going around. You know, Dan's the second person to win the belt twice besides Riley. It's kind of it's the only match really where Dan's beaten Roca in anything, interestingly enough. Even though they had Riley there as like a pivot point, even though it wasn't them together. But I love this match a lot, and I really enjoyed revisiting it. So thank you, Aaron, for letting me do that.
Also, Roca opponent lost against him, even that like he still thinks he's 1-0 against Dan Murrell, even though he technically is 1-1. But well,
up to that point, he had said he was 2-0 because they had that match with Christian and Roca played against Dan and Andy Signor, the person.
You're right.
The person who got canceled from the internet first, as completely as anybody. And so Roca still thinks he is the lead in it, even though things were dubious, and even though he technically lost this one, and I don't even know if he counts it.
Yeah.
And then JD, brief thoughts before we go ahead and wrap it up.
Is that you do have a lot of interesting dynamics in this one. Like you do have, as said, you have again, my favorite kind of Riley, the angry Riley and the Roca rivalry going on. And then you also have the Dan Murrell and kind of Roca aspect going on in this. It is one of my favorite matches of all time. And again, Riley, I think it's been said already, Riley was just outclassed. And again, Roca just missed a couple easy questions that he should have got.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is it, right, guys? We said this is going from the beginning to the middle, covering the beginning of the season up until the collision.
We're not doing the.
No, we're not going to talk about Sam Levine and Dan Murrell.
Oh, for the love of God, guys, let me do the bit. Jesus. Well, never mind. I was going to make a joke out of it, but you're all so enthusiastic. That's right. The event ends. Dan Murrell thinks he gets to finally just go home and relax. And Sam Levine, who we didn't discuss it, I didn't put it in there just because that's, I mean, again, those things could be a whole nother discussion on their own, and I may just do it at another point, but the free-for-alls, Sam Levine wins the free-for-all. He comes out at the end of the collision and says, I'm going to be that guy that takes you on. Let's do it. And so they immediately launch into another titles match that goes on to be Dan's next defense of the belt, 26-23. He takes the belt again and defends against Sam Levine. So an interesting point about this match is, and I believe they have it there, this is the only defense that's ever happened in the single, or the only title match that's ever happened in the singles league where the person doesn't actually have a positive record. Sam's record was 3-3 going into this match and 3-4 after this match, which is an occurrence we've seen in other smaller leagues. IG, when it got started, Star Wars, we're seeing it now. I mean, really, Ace versus Alex was the first title match where you look at the records and go, that makes sense for a title match. Yeah. But this was the odd one because he won it and he goes, all right, let's do it. So we'll go around one more time. I'll start with Jordan. What are your thoughts on this match?
Well, I mean, again, you kind of have this match to solidify Dan Murrell, like even more as the GOAT. I mean, he just plays that three-way match, and then Sam Levine just like, surprise, I'm here, and I'm going to challenge you. And so they just do it on the spot. I mean, I wonder how much of that was actually like on the spot, or if it was like part of the storyline. They knew about it going in. I don't know, but yeah, just to see that Dan Murrell just take down on Sam Levine. I mean, it was a close match, but I mean, for him to do it right after having an already super intense match, I mean, you can see that like by the end he just wiped out. So I mean, yeah. I really enjoyed it though.
Yeah. Robert, thoughts on this match?
This is interesting because this is, Dan's dominant the whole way. I don't think Sam ever takes a lead till the end. Dan goes perfect and misses the bonus question. This is before Sam goes full Super Saiyan Sam. I don't think after this match he doesn't lose another singles match, right? Before he retires.
I don't believe so. No.
This is the last one before he goes on those Ultimate Schmoedown runs.
And I will say, like, you're right. He never did have a lead. But I remember watching this because I remember when Sam won the free-for-all, like my thoughts were, because until that point he had been a very middling player in singles. Mm-hmm. And obviously he had a team that flat out failed in their first match. And my thoughts were, well, that's a bit of a wasted title shot. Like whoever's going to get it, they'll just beat him at this point because he's beating smaller competitors. And then he brings this match, and this was the first match where I really went, oh, shit, even though he lost, he can hang. This is the first match where he looks really ready for it.
That's a fair point, Aaron. You're right. This is the first one where you're like, you can see him as a champion. You get why he gets a chance to cash in the shot. And I remember watching this in 2017 when they got to the second part of the collision. I was like, wow, there's a lot of time left after this match. What's going to happen? And then Sam comes on. I'm like, fuck yes, let's go. Let's freaking go. And that's what I
say. It's a waste that they've never done anything like this again. I wish they'd use these title shots in a more interesting way. Like, this is the most interesting thing that could happen. And I mean, the two that followed up, briefly, just my thoughts on it, not to kind of bring it into the conversation, but the second one that Brienne won, I always thought that was a bit of a layup waste. I think the Shire Wolves did go on to prove they deserve to be champions. Yeah. But someone who was never a title contender in Brienne, bringing in a player who had never played in the Schmoedown, making a team that was 0-0 with a title shot, that was the biggest. I mean, that's a bigger that to me, might even be a bigger layup of a title shot than Alex taking on Bruce Green.
Oh my
That
God.
score only looks as bad as it does because he lost points in the
I got into a
speedway.
back and forth with Rachel about that one time on the internet. That
Yeah,
was fun.
and again, they went on to prove that they were good champions. Like, it's not that
Yeah.
they played
After
poorly
they
at
beat
all.
Who's
It's
the
just
Boss, I was like, of course they're champions. But that one,
right.
I was like, come on, guys, you didn't
That
have to play above the line. If you guys played above the line, it would have been, I don't know
right.
if they win, who wins, but it would have been different.
I mean,
Yeah.
to me, like, their legacy is solidified, but their initial win is a layup match.
Yes.
And as somebody who was at the Orlando event, I enjoyed that match, but I wish it could have been kind of used in a better way. I think this is the most unique use of a title shot in the history of the Schmoedown, where it's like, no, I know you just won, but like, I want to play you now. But before we wrap up, JD, go ahead and give your brief thoughts on it, and then we'll wrap the show up.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting that they never did it again, but I think that probably also has to do with the fact that that it was probably a logistical nightmare to figure all that out and just how to put that all together and make it like work. It's really it is an interesting use of the title shot. I don't think we'll ever see it that way again. They were also playing into the fact that Screen Junkies did their Last Man Standing, and how Dan Murrell basically was the champion, but he decided to go first and made it all the way to the end. So they were also kind of, and the winner of that kind of got a automatic title shot. So I guess they were playing with that. They were playing with that element, and somebody similarly brought it out right after he won a movie fight. So they were playing on that dynamic that they were doing with Last Man Standing. I think that's why they did it, and I don't think they'll do it again because I think, as I said, logistically, I assume it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like. Oh, sorry. Just one quick thing I was gonna say. I feel like maybe they might do it once we get back to live matches, but definitely not in the format that we're at now. But I kind of feel like we might see some cool stuff when we get back to, because it's something that we've all been waiting for, getting back to live matches. That I know for me, definitely.
No, I think they have something. I think they have the cliffhangers though. That's why you have the cliffhangers, the things that end every single live event. So you don't really need to do something like that as a kind of result. And again, you do have a limited amount of time, and again, you only rented that space for a certain amount of period of time. So again, and you have to be out by it. So I think again, I think we're not going to see it. I wish they would. Don't get me wrong. I'm with you, all of you. I wish they would do something like that again, but I just don't think they are.
And that is the episode, guys. Obviously, at the end of it, the collision ends. The Patriots are still the champs. Dan is once again the singles champ. And next week, we will be getting into the back end of season 4. I have a different set of panelists coming in for the back end of season 4, which was really one of the first sections of the Schmoedown that really shook it up. Some of the things that we referenced to today really kick into full gear in that part of the season. But with that said, thank you guys once again for joining me on the show today. I look forward to having all of you back at some point in the future, whether it's doing one of these again or for a proper, Schmoedown fan interview. I'll go quickly around the horn, plug your guys' selves. JD, where can people find you?
You can find me at JD Domash. You can find all the updates on there. I was recently, a couple weeks ago, on General Debates, so talking the best rom-com. So go take a look at that. And again, all updates for all my fan league stuff will be on there.
Absolutely. Robert Kastner, where can people find you?
I'm at Robert Kastner on Facebook. I got a podcast that I'm still working on, a sports podcast. I'll promote that more when I'm a little bit on solid footing, but otherwise I'm in all the fan leagues. Got Untitled, got an MTC match that's going to be coming up here shortly, so check out those. Otherwise, just at me. I like to talk to people.
And Jordan, where can people find you?
So I got a bunch of shows going on over on the Movie Hero Network. We're going to be doing this week our Saturday Night Live show, live from Movie Hero, with my co-host Austin Pez Howell. We'll be breaking down. We've been going through season 12 of Saturday Night Live, just talking about our favorite episodes and sketches. And then we got a pretty big show going on Friday. We're doing tier ranker fights, and we're actually going to have Video Drew on the show, and then Adam Witt, and then also we might have a possible appearance by Kaiser too. we're in talks. So we're going to see how that goes down. And also Aaron's going to be on the show with us. So that should be a great time. We're going
Thank
to be
you
talking
for
best.
introducing your biggest guest. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Best for last.
Yes, the best for last. But we're going to be talking best and worst movie villains, and we're going to be ranking them. So that should be a fun time. And then I also run the Showdown Friends and Family group over on Facebook. So if you ever have anything that you want to self-promote, that's a perfect place for it. We always welcome that. And then we always hype up and promote the Schmoedown, so you can talk Schmoedown over there too. So, yeah.
All right, and you guys can find me here on TMG doing everything everywhere. We have, as things release, we have movie reviews and trailer reactions going up now, both from myself and Matt Beer, so be sure to check those out. Some of the more recent ones, yesterday and earlier today, we had Raya and the Last Dragon go up, as well as Tom and Jerry. We also should have a Chaos Walking review coming soon if it's not up already, so be sure to check those out. We also are, in terms of our podcast, every Sunday at noon, we have the Supernova Show. Robert Kastner is a frequent appearer on that, talking about all the nerdiest things in the world. So check that out. SchmoeTalks airs every Monday at 7 o'clock. We have 2 sports-related podcasts that are currently on hiatus. We have Inside the Horseshoe with Matt Beer, our football show, and Suplex City Chats with Matty G, our wrestling show. They'll be back as soon as the hosts can get the shows back and the football season returns for that show. We have every Friday. This week we will not have one, but starting next week, every week we'll be reviewing the latest streaming shows. Friday at 8 p.m. EST, beginning with The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And then on Saturdays, of course, our main show, After Dark, airs at 9 p.m. EST, 6 p.m. PST. Tune in, watch, hang out. We talk all the latest stuff in the movie world and just kind of fuck around for a couple of hours. That said, thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe, click the bell, like the video, and stay tuned to the channel for all the content we have coming up. We'll see you guys then. Have a great day, guys.